That's the whole thing.
How do you know?
Carl Schmitt
Autocrats tend to kill everyone,
Carl
even their own
Schmitt makes
supporters.
this point very well in his work. It's the friend-enemy distinction, right?
Carl Schmitt, the Nazi theoretician.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't care.
Are you a fan of the Nazis?
I don't care. I frankly don't care being called a Nazi at all.
I didn't say that. I didn't actually say that. I said, are you a fan of the Nazis?
Well, they persecuted the church a little bit. I'm not a fan of that. But
what about the persecution of the Jews?
Well, I mean, I certainly don't support anyone's human dignity being assaulted. I'm a Catholic.
But you don't condemn Nazi persecution of the Jews?
I think that there was a little bit of persecution and stuff like that, which is bad.
We may have to rename this show because you're a little bit more than a far-right Republican.
Hey, what can I say?
I think you can say, I'm a fascist.
Yeah, I am. Absolutely.
I'm just checking who's clapping just to get my set of where everyone is on this. Because you know that millions of people are going to be watching you on YouTube and checking out who the fascists and the Nazis are.
I'm not ashamed of that whatsoever.
No, clearly you're not.
Welcome back to Posting Through It. I'm Jared Holt.
And I'm Michael Edison Hayden.
We are very hyped for this episode. Today, we're talking about debating the far right with one of the best to do it, Mehdi Hasan. But before we bring him in, we're going to fill in some context here, just in case people aren't up to date with the viral debate he did on a YouTube channel called Jubilee in a series called Surrounded.
You've probably seen clips of this by now. It's been really, really big in progressive circles online. It's probably also big in far-right circles online. I've seen a little bit of that, largely because Mehdi has been pitted against a lot of people who have very ugly views, who are expressing fascist or white nationalist sentiment. You know, I even have a group chat where somebody made Mehdi's face, like reacting in disgust, the kind of main image of the chat. It's sort of kind of had a big impact on people.
I think we're both in that chat, Mike. But for people who don't know what we're talking about here, first I'll start with Jubilee Media. It's a digital media company based in LA that makes content about social issues. I think that is probably the generous way to put it. A not so generous way to put it would be that they pit random people against each other and profit off the conflicts that occur. This company is kind of weird. It leaves a strange taste in my mouth, mostly because it pretends that this content is something revolutionary, not just an extension of reality television. This is from its website. Jubilee Media is a digital media company that pushes boundaries, tackles taboos, and breaks the rules. We believe discomfort and conflict are pivotal forces in creating human connection. In short, we're not afraid to go there. Okay. Personally, I find this genre of content sort of unsettling. Something about it, to me, feels weird, but I must be an outlier because it is wildly popular online. One of their popular shows, and they have several, is called Surrounded. That's the show that our guest today was on. And here's how it works. They bring in a notable figure, usually somebody known for debating politics, taking clear positions, and they throw them in a room with 20 or 25 people who hold opposite beliefs. There's a table in the middle of the room where the featured guest sits, and their opponents, seated in the circle surrounding them, get it? Take turns going up to the table and arguing with the guest. If you watch this show, you'll also see people in the circle holding up red flags at various points. That's a voting system. If someone on their side is crashing and burning, or if they've simply had enough of the conversation, you'll see them start to raise these up. If enough flags go up, it closes down the debate and cycles on to the next person. Jubilee debuted Surrounded in September last year, and there's been, I think, 18 episodes so far by my count. Some of the guests on past episodes include right-wing pundits like Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, and Candace Owens. There's also been some liberals and progressives in the hot seat, too. Pete Buttigieg, Sam Cedar, and Destiny, the latter being a live streamer who I have many unkind thoughts about, but I'll have to save that for another time because that's not why we're here today.
That's right, Jared. Mehdi Hasan was the featured guest on an episode of Surrounded that Jubilee Media uploaded on July 20th. And in addition to the 10.3 million views it's racked up on YouTube as of the time we're recording this, it's also reignited some arguments that those of us who have covered extremism are pretty familiar with by now. Arguments about platforming and amplifying the radical right, whether these sorts of shows can actually accomplish anything, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, is there enough to gain by doing this that outweighs the costs?
We figured what better person to discuss those kinds of questions than the man himself, Mehdi Hasan.
So excited about this interview. I think you guys are going to love it. I'm a big fan of Mehdi's work.
Joining the podcast now is Mehdi Hasan. He's the editor-in-chief and CEO of Zeteo, an independent news media organization, and the author of a 2023 book called Win Every Argument, The Art of Debating, Persuading, and Public Speaking. That's down in the episode description. Mehdi, how's it going?
Thanks for having me, Jared.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us. You've been very busy since a certain YouTube video came out. We're talking about the appearance you made on the Jubilee show, Surrounded. First off, can you just take us a little bit behind the scenes and tell us how a video like that comes into existence? Because I think a lot of our audience, might have seen the video or saw clips of it, but how does something like that come into existence? Did they reach out to you? Were there rules? What was that like?
Yeah, it's a good question. They reached out to me via my agents. I had heard of Jubilee. Obviously, I'd seen bits of Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro. I don't think I'd watched a whole one till they reached out to me. And I was kind of on the fence as to, is this something I want to do? It looks entertaining, looks a little crazy. What would that look like? I mean, look, it's very easy to persuade me to have an argument. It doesn't take long to get me into an argument. I like a good argument. I like a good debate. If you say 20 people against one, I'm like, I like those odds. Let's do it. But obviously I was aware of the pitfalls and some of the criticisms that would come my way, that have come my way since it dropped, legitimate criticisms. But I did speak to Sam Cedar, who's a good friend of mine from the Majority Report, who had done Surrounded a few months before me. He was one of the few progressives to have done it. Most of the people who have done it tend to be on the right. Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens, what's his name? Jordan Peterson. All of those folks had done it. And I was like, well, maybe it's a good chance for a progressive to go in there and do it. I know Pete Buttigieg had done it, but his was a kind of mild one. So that was the kind of thinking I had when they approached me. I kind of asked the questions I thought needed to be asked for due diligence. How does it work? Is it taped? Is it edited? Where do you find the people? What's it going to be called? Do I get to pick my own topics? All of that good stuff. And clearly, I think going forward, somebody asked me, would you recommend other people to do this? And someone has asked me, a very prominent journalist has been asked by Jubilee to do it, and he called me and he said, I just saw yours, should I do it? And I said, look, I'm not going to tell people to do it or not do it. What I would say is just be more aware of what's coming your way. Maybe be a little bit more involved in the vetting of the 20 people.
Yeah, well, we wanted to ask about that. A lot of the people who showed up to your debate, they were identified as far-right conservatives, which, in today's politics could mean anything.
Yes, exactly.
Far-right conservatives are running the country. But the people who showed up were particularly just, in my opinion, nasty to you.
Yeah.
Questioning your legitimacy as an American. One guy, I think this is probably the clip that went around the most, where you asked him, are you a fascist? And he was like, oh yeah, maybe I am. So what do you know about the vetting? You mentioned that as, something you've thought about in hindsight, but do you know where they got these people, or did you know who you would be talking to?
Yeah, I don't know where they found these people or how they found them. I did ask beforehand, well, who's going to identify it as a far-right conservative? Like when they said that was the title of the show, the title morphed over months of preparation. And when it was far-right conservatives, I did ask them at one point, like, who identifies, who proudly comes on and says, yeah, I'll be the far-right conservative. But, I guess my questions were answered on the night. I don't know, to be honest. And I've asked Jubilee, and journalists have asked Jubilee. I don't think they've made any comments since the show came out. I don't see any statement or anything they've put out. I know a lot of media has covered this story. I just did an interview with The Guardian this week about it. I think The Guardian reached out to them as well. They haven't put out a statement, and they haven't told me exactly how they found these people. What worries me is that some of these people were not just ordinary, regular folks off the street. They are quote-unquote influencers. They have Instagram pages with lots of followers where they say and do anti-Semitic and racist things. They are associates of Nick Fuentes and his kind of Groyper group of Holocaust deniers and Nazis. So that is worrying that, more than one of them got through the net.
I think it's also concerning that that's the type of mentality you need to have to be an influencer on the right now, particularly for young people. I think that's something that really concerned me when I was seeing it, is just how they seem to want to be rewarded for being further and further to the right or more aligned with open fascism. Did that surprise you? Just the willingness to give voice to the Great Replacement stuff,
yes.
To say that they were fascist, that surprised you?
Yeah, you had Great Replacement, you had White Genocide, you had all of the greatest hits from these folks turning up. And what did surprise me and stun me a little bit is the way they were so open about it, so proud of it. Remember, this is not 20 pensioners in their 60s and 70s, retired white folks in Mississippi talking to me. These are 20 young people in a warehouse in LA on YouTube. And I was surprised that they were willing to say this stuff so out loud. When that guy Connor says I'm a fascist, 4 or 5 people clap and cheer. And there's a moment, if you see the video, where I turn around and say, I'm just seeing who around me is supported. It's not an aberration. This is not just one guy who everyone else is like, oh, sheesh, he's let down the side. Seems to be the near consensus of the room, or at least a rather vocal minority in this room. So that was worrying. Look, I'm not naive enough to not realize that these views have been held by many Americans for many, many years. The difference now is that you're willing to say it out loud. You're willing to say it proudly. You're willing to say it to applause and laughter. You're willing to say it on a YouTube show that millions are going to watch. You're willing to say it without any repercussions. I mean, I know Connor claimed to have been fired because of it. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. But the rest have done fine out of it. Joseph, the young kid in the baseball cap who insisted I get out of his country, apparently, he's been loving all the new followers and fame he's been getting out of this, which is one of the arguments against doing a show like this, because you give these people even bigger platforms, which is a legitimate critique. I don't dispute that.
I want to get into some of those arguments, but I have one more question about the logistics of doing that video. I'm just curious what that room was like when the cameras were off. I can imagine, based on my read of how you did, which seemed, I think you did a perfectly fine job holding your own and pushing back and frankly, just embarrassing some of these people. But, I imagine the room felt a little different before and after that conversation. I'm curious what these folks were like when the cameras turned off, or if any of them, had conversations with you afterward. What was that like?
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm limited in what I can say about what happened behind the scenes, but I will say this. When I walked into that room, at that moment, I didn't realize how bad it was going to get. It got very bad very quick once the camera started rolling. I think one guy waved at me and said, I remember, for context, a lot of people don't realize this. I walk into that room, the way Surrounded on Jubilee works is they have no idea who's coming out. All they know is it's a progressive. So they did not know it was me. Just as the liberal woke folks who sat in a circle when Ben Shapiro or Charlie Kirkovich had no idea it would be them. So in that sense, when I walked out, there was a little bit of surprise from the folks there who knew me. Some folks had no idea who I was. Some folks were, I've seen you on Piers Morgan. One guy, she said, I like you on Piers Morgan, which was amusing given what then transpired over the next hour, 40 minutes. And look, I didn't really interact with them at all. There was a toilet break in the middle in which I kind of held my head in my hands and said, what the hell's going on here? Do I have to go up for part 2? And at the end of it, me and a couple of people I took with me got the hell out of Dodge. We kind of we're leaving. We don't want really any interactions. When they were leaving the set, one guy did lean over and whisper to me, I wouldn't deport you, which I thought was very generous.
Wow. Very kind.
I did hear them as they walked off make some pretty bigoted remarks, which I won't quote, even worse than what you saw on TV.
Jeez. So that's the how of this came together. I want to get into the questions that you've kind of hinted at already, which is, why do a show like this at all? Is there anything that progressives or I guess just anybody who's not far right has to gain by debating fascists?
No. is the answer. I've just done a video for Zateo. I don't think there's a value in debating fascists. And people might say, well, why did you do it then? Because I genuinely didn't believe I was going to be confronted by open fascists. I thought I was going to debate a bunch of Trump supporters who were going to say, Donald Trump, rah, 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 greatest president ever. Tariffs are wonderful. He's the best. He's the free speech champion. We love him. He's making America great again. I did not know that I would face people who say, I don't even believe in democracy. I don't believe there should be elections. I believe in a General Franco figure who is a dictator who gets to kill people I don't like. We were going to face people who I was going to go up against people who say, the Republican Party right now is way too moderate for me. So that was a bit of a shock to the system. No, if the Jubilee folks had said to me beforehand, you're going to go up against a guy who says he's a fascist, another guy who talks about great replacement theory, multiple guys who tell you to get out of their country, I'd have said, I'll pass. I'm a little busy that day. I wouldn't have gone into that willingly. I thought there was value in debating some MAGA folks, not because I want to change their minds. I believe the MAGA movement is a cult. There's no changing of minds there. But I do think a show that gets millions of viewers, and not just millions of viewers, millions of apolitical, low information voters, young people who don't follow politics. One of the reasons I did this is because I didn't know much about Jubilee other than the kind of couple of clips I'd seen from Kirk and Shapiro. But my daughter, my niece, a bunch of young people are like, oh yeah, we know Jubilee. And I was like, oh, it's a totally different demographic. It's a different audience. It's a good way to reach people who can't normally be reached by political journalism and the kind of stuff I do and the kind of places I go. So that was an incentive. And the idea of reaching people and showing them how ridiculous pro-Trump and far-right arguments are, that did appeal to me. And I am someone who values debate. I do believe debate has intrinsic value. I did write a book about debating because I think it's important to debate. I think it's important to debate well. I actually enjoy a debate. So as I say, I actually looked forward to the idea of, okay, this will be actually fun, taking on 20 people who I disagree with. Wasn't that fun in the end?
Well, you're very good at debating, and it's a big part of why people know you. But I do have a question in there, which is you say, okay, you don't want to debate fascists, which I totally understand, but you might be willing to speak to some people who are MAGA.
Yeah.
So I perceive MAGA to be a fascist movement.
Yeah. And
I'm just curious, like, what if there's a distinction there for you? Because for me, it's obviously complicated because we're talking about half the country is on board with it. But for me, it is a fascist movement. I feel like we're in the middle of it, and if God willing, years later, when we look back on it, we may have the ability to actually see what's happening. I hope that everybody will see it and be disgusted. But I'm just curious what's your thoughts about it. And
Michael, it's a great question.
That distinction.
It's a great question. And I also believe that the MAGA movement is a fascistic movement. I think I was the first person on MSNBC to use the F word about Donald Trump back in the summer of 2020 when unmarked cars were people in masks, pre the ICE days of today, were grabbing people off the street in Portland, Oregon and just disappearing them. I've been going on about that since then. And, when I was on MSNBC, I had a hygiene test of my own where, I wouldn't have election deniers on the show, which basically ruled out the majority of the elected Republican Party in Congress. I remember having Dan Crenshaw on and Googling to see, Dan Crenshaw agreed to come on. I was like, is he election denier? Oh, he signed the Texas lawsuit, but he didn't vote against on January 6th. I was like, does that make him a denier? So the problem was, as we got closer and closer to 2024, some of us with those hygiene tests had to kind of think about it again, because when, as you say, half the country, I don't think it's half the country, but about 30% of the country, when you say half the country, you mean one of the two parties' followings, right? We only have a two-party system. So if one of those two parties that represent roughly half, but probably much less than half of the country is going fully fascistic, then you're in a really weird place as a political journalist. Do you then just ignore and refuse to speak with, interview, engage, debate, as you put it, one half of the country or one of the two major parties? Do you just sit in an echo chamber talking to Democrats? So that's something I had to wrestle with. It's not an easy decision to wrestle with. It's easy, as a journalist, I want to have, as you say, Michael, I'm known for doing tough interviews. That's how I got known in the US. I interviewed Eric Prince on Al Jazeera English. That's how most Americans and most American journalists first came across me. And I like challenging people I disagree with, even Israelis who are engaged in ethnic cleansing right now, or neoconservatives who caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq. But yes, I did try and have this hygiene test, which says if you're an election denier or a climate denier or a Holocaust denier, if you think up is down, black is white, hot is cold, there's no value in debating you just for clickbait. And I've tried to hold on to that. I still kind of am. It's become harder and harder. I guess, Michael, to go back to your question, I perceive the Jubilee thing as something slightly different. I didn't see them as open fascists, and I would distinguish between open fascists and non-open fascists in the sense that, does Donald Trump want to be a dictator? Clearly he does. But do all of the Trump people go around saying we don't believe in democracy? No, they don't. They pretend they do, right? It's like Orban-style illiberal democracy. What surprised me about Connor is that Connor's like, well, I don't believe in democracy. I don't think we should have any elections. I think that my guy should be in charge and kill whoever he wants. There's no value in debating that person or that viewpoint. Of course not. That's violence, right? Why would I do that? That's someone who doesn't consider me an equal. Same way I don't debate open white supremacists. But if you're going to debate a lot of Republicans these days, a lot of Republicans are racist. So it's a tricky one. I don't have an easy answer for it other than it's complicated. It's a spectrum, and I try and pick each case on its merits and demerits. And maybe I got it wrong with Jubilee, but I did think there would be a worthwhile debate to have with some MAGA folks. And don't forget, these are supposed to be ordinary people. And I'll tell you what, I do give ordinary people a bit more of a pass than I give elected officials. Right? Elected officials, your Marjorie Taylor Greenes and others and Lauren Boeberts, we know what they're doing. They are trying to get clicks. Many of them are grifters. They're playing to the cameras. They're playing outrage porn. Ordinary MAGA folks, I want to hope that some of them are just brainwashed or ill-informed or ignorant, and there might be some value having a debate. As it turns out, a lot of these people were not ordinary folks. They were influencers and grifters in their own right.
So one of the criticisms that I hear about debate shows like this is one that's very familiar to Mike and I as people who have covered extremist movements in the U.S. going on a decade now. It's actually how we became friends, was, both getting doxxed and harassed simultaneously and connecting and sharing horror stories. And I've probably heard these arguments in a million different forms, a million different times, that covering the far right or confronting the far right has a risk because it amplifies or it platforms bad people. And, I imagine you've heard that as you've debated people on the right. You've probably heard plenty of that.
I've made that argument. I've made that argument myself to other media organizations who say, the best sunlight is the best disinfectant. Better to have the debate than not. I'm like, not always, actually.
So I'm curious, like, if you're going to engage, somebody like yourself, you've got, a good sized media profile, people tune in to watch you debate. Necessarily that platforms the other person alongside you. So I'm curious, when you're making those decisions, like you said earlier, about, approaching case by case, what's worth it? What's worth covering? Who's worth debating? What are the kind of considerations that are going through your head?
That is such a good question, Jared. I'm glad you asked it because that is a quite complicated subject for me. And I wrote a book about debating, but I'm not a debate bro. I'm not like, let's just debate any place, anytime, anyone. No, I do have hygiene tests and standards. In fact, the Jubilee folks got mad at me. You remember the guy in the red tie? I forget his name. He came up and he's like, "Oh, how can you believe in free speech? You're refusing to debate certain people in this room." Yeah, I was like, yeah, I don't debate everyone, nor do you.
First off, I just wanted to touch on that. You said that you support free speech, of course, right? So what I'm confused about is you've refused to debate people that I've disagreed with you because you said that they're racist or they're fascist, right?
No. If we're going to do facts, they said they were racist and fascist. Get your facts right before you start arguing.
So isn't the whole entire point of a debate to debate people that you don't agree with?
I don't debate people who don't see me, A, as equal. No point. Or B, support democracy, because that would undermine the whole idea of the debate. If you don't support democracy, as our friend here doesn't, and support General Franco, then what is the point of a debate? The First Amendment doesn't mean you have to debate everyone. Somebody comes up to you in the street and starts talking to you. You don't have an obligation to carry on talking to them. I'm sure you go about your business. Somebody comes up to you in the subway and sits next to you and starts ranting in your face. So you're not going to start debating.
So everybody here in the Jubilee,
everyone here has hygiene standards, as do you. There are people you wouldn't debate, I'm sure, as well.
Everyone has their own bottom line of somebody they won't sit down with. You go down the far right, like they all, somebody won't talk to Tucker Carlson, but Tucker Carlson won't talk to Nick Fuentes. Like we can go down everyone has their own kind of hygiene test, pretty much. And I do try and, I'm not someone who just says debate anytime, any place. I wrote a book on debating, which I was very explicit in the book, that I believe in good faith debate. I don't believe in bad faith debate. If Marjorie Taylor Greene said tomorrow, let's have a public debate, you and me, I would probably say no, because there's no value in it, because she's a fraud. And I don't want to amplify her insanity. And there's nothing to be gained. I don't think so. But, Piers Morgan is a good example of this. His show is a debate show, right? I do his show quite regularly, but I never do his panels. You'll never see me in those 4-person panels going, in that thing. I will go on and do a one-on-one with Piers because I think debating Piers is of value because he has a huge platform and he's someone who claims to be open-minded and does seem to have shifted a little bit on certain views I care about. For example, Gaza. I've been on Piers Morgan's show and I've debated Israeli military spokespersons. I've debated recently Alan Dershowitz. Had to take a shower after that. I've
God
debated,
bless you. God bless
I've
you.
debated Dan Crenshaw, member of Congress. So I think it's fair to say I am trying to think these through and think, okay, debating a sitting Republican member of Congress, that's worth it. That is a debate worth having because they are someone who, they're not gaining from sitting next to me. I'm not giving them undue attention. They're already there. They're a powerful person making decisions that affect our lives, worth debating them. Same with an Israeli military type person or an Israeli politician. Even Dershowitz, like whether I like it or not, he is one of the most famous lawyers in American history. He has represented Trump in impeachment. He did represent Epstein. And therefore, it was worthwhile. And he has written multiple books on Israel. So that's how I decide. It's like, is the person vaguely credible? Do they have a status and stature that's nothing to do with me? And then there is the argument. This is the weakest argument of all, but I'm going to say it. There is the argument, and I know it's weak. And if I was arguing against myself, I would attack me for it. But I'm going to say it. There is the argument that says these shows exist. And if you don't go on them, someone else will go on them. And I'd rather it be me than someone who's not very good. And Jubilee is not disappearing tomorrow. Had I not done that Jubilee, someone else will do that Jubilee. In fact, Cenk Uyghur's Jubilee just came out a week ago. They got Cenk from the Young Turks to do one slightly different angle. He got slightly saner people. But that's the other problem too. Like I can say no to someone. When I lived in the UK, and I became a public figure in 2009-10. And that was at the height of the kind of still war on terror, radicalization, ISIS was coming up. All the things I used to get invited for was to be the Muslim guy who comes on to debate, like somebody saying, Islamic extremism is the biggest threat to our way of life. And I was the most prominent British Muslim on TV at the time. So I always got the call after a terrorist attack or after some big story, like, can you come on and debate some rabid Islamophobe? And I always had to decide then, do I want to do that? And there were times when I would say, I'm not doing it. And then I would watch that BBC panel and some other person would get their ass handed to them. And I was like, I should have done it. So that kind of guides me as well in terms of like, if it's a big enough platform, it's already out there, is there value in doing it? Now, having said that, I would never do Fox. I was asked to go on Laura Ingram's show. I was asked to go on Tucker Carlson's show. I've always said no to Fox because no matter how big a platform Fox is, I refuse. That's a red line for me.
I said no to Tucker Carlson in 2017, but that would have been a death trap for me because I was not as good a debater as you are.
With that network, it doesn't matter whether you're a good debater or not. The whole thing is an ambush from start to finish.
What I want to ask about is being the Muslim guy, which you mentioned, because I think it's a big thing. I mean, it was a very visceral thing for me. My mother's an immigrant from Egypt. My kids are mixed Indian, Arab, and white. And I watched, you take a lot of racism directly to your face in that setting, in a YouTube video.
Yeah.
And I know how that can really sting. And I was really trying to look at your face to see how that felt, because I mean, you're dealing with people who, have a very limited grasp on some of the things they're talking about, but they're treating you like you're a moron. And it's not just how you're treated, but also the rhetoric that they used. I was like, I mean, I'm just curious how you kind of tough that out, and then broader. And I think this is an important one. I've seen a lot of racism directed to you, even from the left, because you're so prominent, and because of who you are, and so forth. Also, not from the Red Scare type people, the teal adjacent type people. There's a lot of vitriol towards you that I really think is very racial. And I'm just curious, like how do you compartmentalize that stuff and hold on to your emotions, because it's really there's a lot of bait to try to make you angry, to try to make you into the caricature they want you to be.
Oh yeah, they love kind of angry Muslim guy, and it's difficult for me, because I do have a temper, and I am a very passionate person, and not known for my calmness or composure. A lot of people ask me after Jubilee, how did you stay calm for an hour and a half? I was like, I don't know. I'm asking myself that question because when I watch that back, I'm like, wow, I'm impressed at my own restraint. There are moments where you can see I'm about to just lose it. Especially with good old Richie. But when I think about that question, I wrote in my book, in Win Every Argument, I wrote about the importance of staying cool and calm. And I say very openly, it's hard for me to do that. I'm writing that chapter is a very personal chapter for me because it's not easy for me. And I gave the example in the book of when I debated Douglas Murray in Oxford about 15 years ago, something like that, where we were talking about free speech in Europe and kind of the threat of Muslims to free speech. And I remember he kept saying outrageously offensive things about the Prophet of Islam, about Prophet Muhammad, on purpose. And he was doing it just to see what my reaction would be. This was either shortly before Charlie Hebdo. And I remember sitting there smiling. And a friend of mine watched the video afterwards on YouTube and said, Muslim friend said, why the hell are you smiling? where he's saying all this ridiculously offensive things about our prophet. I'm smiling because inside he's having the effect he wants on me. I'm livid, furious. I want to punch him in the face, but I don't want to give him that victory, right? That's what Douglas Murray wants. That's why he does all the racist provocations to people he goes up against. It is bait, as you say. And I think he just defended himself against a libel case from a Muslim rabble-rouser in the UK called Mohammed Hijab. And he loves all this stuff. He loves doing that. And people fall for it. And I wasn't going to fall for it then. I debated him last year for my sins in Canada and Israel, and same thing, where keep sticking in Hamas jabs. Your friends in Hamas, your friends in Qatar. I did a debate with Michael Gove, the Conservative politician, a few weeks ago in London. It hasn't dropped yet on YouTube, but he did the same thing. Your friends in Tehran. And these are all racially coded insults. Like the arguments I'm making are arguments made by mainstream white leftist, centrist conservatives even. But because I'm making it, it must be that I'm an Iranian stooge or a Qatari apologist. So that, as you say, Michael, that's from across the political spectrum, that kind of stuff. And I've gotten used to it, but it still pisses me off. I mean, you can see when that video drops of that debate in London, I'm pissed off that Michael Gove immediately went there right at the start of the debate to say, your friends in Tehran. Like, the irony is there are many people in the Shia community that I belong to who attack me because I'm critical of Iran. So there's the irony of being in between those two places. So yes, it is very hard to deal with that. And actually about Jubilee, look, I'm a pretty thick-skinned guy. Like you said, I'm known for debating. I like debating. I debated at university. I debated in high school. I spent my life arguing with friends and family. I've argued with random people in the street. I've gone to foreign countries and interviewed dictatorial leaders. I've done all of that. So I'm pretty used to this stuff. But still, even then, the Jubilee stuff, I'm only a human being. And I've said this elsewhere. With the journalist and debater hat on, fine. But take the journalist debater hat off. I am a brown Muslim immigrant. I am the person they most want to target. I am the person this administration is most obsessed with. And, after our Latino brothers and sisters, it's probably the Muslim immigrants in a very close number two. And that is a real issue because even if I was okay with it, and I wasn't okay with it, you can see I'm pretty annoyed when people keep telling me to get up. By the time the fourth guy has said it, I'm pissed. But actually, one regret I do have, when people say, do you regret doing it? I don't regret doing it. I did what I did. But one bit of sadness in me where I feel like I let down some folks is I did see some comments from some brown folks saying that they felt upset and infuriated on my behalf, right? There were people who watched it at home saying it was traumatic for them to see someone who looked like them with a name like theirs having to go through that. And I think that is something that Jubilee need to think long and hard about, especially in a context like mine versus a Destiny or a Buttigieg or a Sam Cedar. I was in a room as an immigrant with a bunch of people who came bent on demonizing immigrants, immigration, and doing great replacement bullshit.
Despite the emotions you feel, the things people say to try to provoke you, you manage to keep a cool head. You write about that in your book, Win Every Argument, which I really enjoyed. That book outlines strategies that people can use in arguments to win over audiences with the truth and pick apart bad arguments. In it, you talk about ways of connecting with people, how to choose your words carefully, how to strategically cast doubt on your opponent, employ humor, all kinds of things people can do to win over people that they're talking to or other people in the room. I read that book on a flight during some work travel shortly after it came out, and I really enjoyed it. You would not catch me dead in a debate. It's just not my thing.
Not for everyone.
I have a very visceral reaction, but people who can do it well, I respect a lot. And I think there's a lot of value for people, even if they're not, signing up to go on the next Jubilee video, things to understand about how arguments work and how persuasion works that can be useful in their day-to-day life. So my question for you is some of the different strategies you outline in this book. You've been doing this for a long time. I imagine it's muscle memory to a large degree, but how conscious of you of these strategies when you go into a debate setting? Obviously, there's the facts of the matter and what's being talked about, but in terms of I guess, are you sitting there thinking, in the middle of a conversation, you have a thought in the back of your head that's like, this would be a great time for a joke. this needs to get lined up a little bit? Or
So-
how does that work in your head?
No, it's intriguing you put it that way. I think muscle memory is a good phrase. For me now, I've done this so much for so many years that it does come naturally. But what I make clear in my book is this isn't about natural born orators. This isn't, Mehdi Hasan does this stuff and I couldn't do what he does. I genuinely believe people can do what I do if they, understand how it works, if they're willing to put in the hours, if they're willing to really work at it and understand the techniques and tips. And I give examples in the book of people like Winston Churchill, who were not great speakers and not great debaters, but we remember them as some of the great orators and debaters of our time, but they worked at it. So that's one point, which is it's something you can actually build up and prepare for over time. And I don't need to do that anymore because I've just spent so much time doing it professionally and personally. In the case of Jubilee specifically, it's interesting because we've just put out a video this morning on 7 debate lessons from my Jubilee video, which a British Labour member of Parliament messaged me and said, you should do a video breaking down what you were doing in that debate because I found it fascinating, your body language. I said, okay, that's a good idea. But what's interesting, to go back to your question, Jared, is I had to go watch the whole debate again and work backwards and go, I was doing that. I was doing that because it wasn't planned. It's just stuff I do in the moment. But when I watch it back, I'm like, there's me using humor. There's me being sarcastic to mock the guy and make him small, which is something I think you should do to your opponents. There's me bringing receipts. There's me, dividing and ruling, which is something I like to do with big groups of people, turn them against one another, which I did with poor old Mateen, the Iranian guy who didn't quite understand that everyone else there hated him as well. So that I worked backward from first principles, but I do think there are lessons to be learned from all of these things. As you say, even if you're not a debater like yourself, these are things, A, you can use in your daily life, and B, to understand what's going on around you. It's not just that you're able to debate yourself, but you're able to see someone, maybe on TV, make an argument and go, well, that doesn't make any sense. What they've just said there is self-contradictory. Or what they've just, I know what they're doing there. They're using emotion to pull at my heartstrings to avoid from the fact that what they're saying is BS. So it also helps you identify bullshit. It also helps you identify the truth. That's fundamentally why I love debating, is because I genuinely believe it is a useful tool to get to the truth through back and forth, if it's done in good faith. But yeah, for me at this point, I guess for Jubilee, the only thing I really consciously did was just prepare facts and figures, which was kind of a waste of time because I turned up with all this information ready. And then I'm like, okay, let's go. One of my claims was Trump is defying the Constitution. I was like, I got it. I'm ready to go. First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, 14th Amendment, 22nd Amendment. I've got all my anecdotes. I've got my Supreme Court rulings. I've got all my case studies. First guy's like, I don't give a shit about the Constitution. We don't care. Oh, how do you debate that then? That's okay. Throw everything up in there. As Mike Tyson says, everyone has a plan until they're punched in the nose. There goes all the planning and arguing. I'm like, okay, we're in a very different place right now. That's when you're seeing my face, the dawning realization that like, they don't care about my Supreme Court rulings or the statistics I've got. They just don't care. But I did go along with a lot of prep. And there is a great moment. We've done a little montage for our Zateo video today, which is you see the independent Straight Arrow News or whatever, their fact checker. They have all these fact checks and it's like, they're all backing me up, which is great. A friend of mine said to me, it was wonderful to see every stat you said came up on screen next to you. So that is important to bring receipts. But obviously in this particular debate, they didn't care about the receipts. But then who cares if they care about the receipts? I care about truth independently of whether people agree with me or not. And I hope that of the 10 million people who watched it on YouTube, if even 1 million of them, if even 1/10 of them, 1 million people went into that debate not knowing who I was, not knowing who they were, just completely impartially to say, what's going on here? And they came away thinking, that guy had some good points. Then that's a victory, a small victory for me.
I want to ask you about the last section, which was about Trump's plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza. And it's really just a way into a bigger question. Yeah. You debated some people who were not very subtle about being anti-Semitic, right? You could just see this as sort of, and this is something we've talked about a lot on this show. We've talked about this kind of anti-Semitic strain in Trump's base that is sort of latched onto this really horrific situation in Gaza and sort of try to use it for anti-Semitic reasons and whatever.
100%.
It struck me when I saw it as I was watching it. I was like, well, this is something you couldn't even imagine 5 years ago, this conversation. It's so strange. It's not that anti-Semitism didn't exist. Of course it did. It's not that there wasn't pain in that region. Of course there was. But there's something has changed, I think, after October 7th. And I just wanted to pull back and just ask, like, what do you think has changed in the sort of the media landscape, which is obviously media also includes this interview, since October 7th? Because it has been, I think, really crazy. There's been just a lot of changes about what can be said, what can't be said, the way people speak about Jews, the way people speak about Arabs and Muslims in the case of this particular debate. I'm just curious about that, what your thoughts about how things have changed. And I know also your media company also is sort of post October 7th. I mean, that's not what, it is, but it really does happen, starts to grow in the aftermath of that. So I'm just curious what your thoughts about that would be.
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of anti-Semitism because I have been frustrated, worried, concerned that some on the left and some in my own Muslim community have embraced a bunch of far-right conservatives who have jumped on the pro-Palestine bandwagon, but not for the reasons the rest of us are on that wagon, if I can call it that. And it does worry me that wherever I go these days, I'm getting texts or people coming up to me saying, hey, you should sit down with Tucker Carlson. You guys have a lot in common. No, we don't. What about Marjorie Taylor Greene? Why don't you have her on? Isn't she great? No, she's not. Why don't you hire Candace Owens at Zateo over my dead body? But this is the kind of stuff that and it's for one reason only, which is they have, stopped clock is right twice a day, said the right thing about Gaza. They've said what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. They've said that Israel should stop killing kids. They've said that AIPAC has too much influence in our politics and that US Congress should stop sending weapons to Israel. All true things. But number one, doesn't cancel out the fact that the rest of their political agenda is horrific, is racist, is fascist, is reactionary, is all of those things. And number two, I do question some of these people's intentions. Not all of them, but some of them. I do worry about, and you saw it in that Jubilee debate, where, there was one, I can't remember her name, blonde, young, white woman who sits opposite me and says, well, Trump doesn't really believe any of this stuff. He's being controlled by a minority group. And I was like, well, do you want to say which group that is? It was very clear where we're going with this.
Why do you think that
Trump is saying this? Do you think that he has some personal interest in cleansing Gaza, or do you think there might be some special interest group or perhaps religious or ethnic group that's, that maybe he received money from them and that's the whole reason why he wants to cleanse Gaza? Or why do you think that is?
I don't do Donald Trump's motivations. I really don't care. My claim is that what he's doing is ethnic cleansing. Well, do you agree with that?
I would actually, probably agree, but I'm just...
You agree that it's ethnic cleansing? You agree with doing ethnic cleansing?
No, I don't agree with it, but I agree that's probably his plan. But I'm trying to figure out, why do you think that is? Because Donald Trump's a white man. He identifies as Christian. I'm not sure if he really is. Well, what interest does he have in preserving a Jewish ethno-state? Why would he have that?
It's a good question. You'd have to ask Donald Trump that question. I've got multiple views. I'm sure you have many views. I'm not sure I like where you're going with your views, but I think Donald Trump is definitely someone who's got financial interests. I
haven't said this before, but once the taping was over, one of the people who was behind me, the worst people all seemed to be sitting behind me. One of the people stood up and said, left or right, we all hate the Jews. And no one said a word. And they filed out of the studio. Wow. And I was like, wow. And as I left that, I said to a colleague of mine who had come with me, I said, I wish Jonathan Greenblatt could have been here today, because I just feel like organized Jewish American establishment groups are really, really in a weird place where they are obsessing on behalf of Israel over some kids on campus with placards about River to the Sea. And they're totally ignoring the massive genocidal threat they face from parts of the Trump base that would happily get rid of a bunch of Jews from America tomorrow. And I just, OG anti-Semitism, the original brand, the far-right Holocaust-denying white supremacist brand is very much alive, well, and growing in the US with the tacit approval of this administration and this president. And it's bizarre to me that you just find all of the leading American Jewish organizations obsessed over Mahmoud Khalil, obsessed over what AOC has said or done this week, and ignoring the fact that there is a young generation of completely racist, anti-Semitic conservatives led by the Nick Fuenteses of this world and others. And they're not declining in number, they're growing in number. And I think Jubilee, some of the folks who turned up on Jubilee, example of that. When I went with that fourth claim, Michael, about ethnic cleansing in Gaza, most of that circle who had been running for the chair to fight with me on any topic, they had no interest in debating me. They agreed with me. They're anti-Israel, but they're not anti-Israel for the reasons you and I might be anti-Israel.
As we're getting closer to the end of our time with you, I want to zoom out a little bit. The debate tactics that you outline in Win Every Argument are not, original Mehdi creations, right? These kinds of strategies are also used by the far right. They're used by politicians. They're used by anybody, who is a skilled public persuader, right? And that's part of the value I see in the book is being able, helping to recognize that kind of thing. But a lot of media outlets, Sateo is kind of a exception to the rule, which is why I appreciate it so much, seem to just get railroaded by this over and over and over again. They have far-right figures come on and try to do a hostile interview and get gish galloped out of their own interview, or they just get, or some YouTuber who thinks that they have what it takes to go, in the pit with Tim Pool or whatever, just gets mowed down because there's like 5 guests that won't let them get a word in and pick apart what they're saying, like by the 3rd word. Why do you think that is? Do you think it is like a lack of understanding?
Yes.
Or I'm just...
I think it's many things. I'm glad you highlighted that because it is a source of frustration for me as someone who does debate for a living, if I can say that. When I watch... Look, my critique of the American media has been, I've said it ad nauseum endlessly for years. I said it while I was at MSNBC. We don't do tough interviews in this country. We don't have a combative, confrontational media setup. It's all very cozy and friendly and courteous. Sunday morning shows are all very pally and inside the beltway. That's why a lot of people have tuned out of the media. It's one of the reasons I did well in the US. Clearly there was an appetite for what I do. People are like, oh, Mehdi does interviews that other people don't do. But it's frustrating to see, in general, US media does not do challenging interviews. And therefore, when you have, conspiracy theorists, far-right folks, extremists, whether it's, your Alex Joneses or your Nick Fuentes or whoever it is, people they're not equipped to interview your average Republican senator who's gish galloping them, let alone your groyper online who's skilled in the arts of YouTube confrontation and online combat. So yes, I do think it's old mainstream media not at all prepared for what's coming their way, haven't done the homework, don't understand the tips and techniques. And look, that is why my position is better not to have these people on and not give them a platform, especially the extremists and the fascists and the folks who push racism and violence. But if you are going to have them on, then at least challenge them, confront them. And that's what doesn't happen. So, you look at Steve Bannon. Have you ever seen an interview where Steve Bannon just got absolutely battered? I haven't. He goes on, he has friendly interviews with journalists who he's friends with because despite being on the far right, he's kept very good relations with mainstream media. Or you have people try and get him and they fail. I remember Mike Cernovich, I think it was, who went on a 60 Minutes years ago. And he was so proud of himself.
I remember this.
And he put that interview out there as, look at me. They thought that they could get me and they didn't. And he was right. They didn't. So I think, if you're gonna do that kind of interview or preparation, it's got to be done in a much savvier way. Journalists have to really understand who they're going up against and not be ambushed, not be deceived, not be caught out. They have to have eyes wide open. They need to talk to people like yourselves who understand this world better than they do. They need to have done their homework, which is a chapter in my book. Do your freaking homework. Steelman the argument. Another point, as you say, not something I invented, but something that people have forgotten about, and I stress in the book. Something I do. I take every opponent seriously, whether they're a student or a world leader. And that doesn't happen in US media. And by the way, there's also just generally the time constraints. To be fair to Jubilee Media, it's an hour and a half. Like you get your fill. Your average cable news interview, I worked in cable for years, is 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and you've got a producer saying, go to break. What can you do in 6-7 minutes? Not very much.
Some of what you're really good at, I just want to point out, it's not a question, but one thing I love about it is just like the who, what, where, when, why that you ask, that is just natural journalistic things that you would do. It's like who, what, who's they? I love those questions because it was always disarming in the context of that interview. And I just thought it was great. It made me look forward to my next confrontational interview.
But on a serious note, like go back to the American media failures. Like you will watch interviews on Sunday morning shows who have a little bit longer than 6 minutes, but still not very long. And they will just run through a list of topics, right? There's no accountability journalism there. It's like, okay, let me ask you about this story in the news. Done, tick. Next question. Let me ask you about this story in the news. And there are no follow-ups. And you cannot do an interview without follow-ups. I've seen times when a politician is on the ropes. You're like, oh, wow, he's cornered. They did get that quote. Hats off to that interviewer. They got the quote that proves they're lying. And then the interviewer will save the politician and say, well, let's move on to the next topic. And you see, relief on the politician's face. I mean, Terry Moran, who did that ABC interview before ABC canned him at the Trump administration's request. You remember the knuckles situation where Trump is saying again and again that Kilmar Brago's, it says MS-13 on his knuckles, absurd, insane. And Moran, instead of going, wow, this guy's nuts. I've got this great moment now of interview. That's what I would be doing if I... Moran's like, Mr. President, let's move on. Let's agree to disagree. No, don't agree to disagree. Call him out. This is your moment. So that frustrates me a great deal when journalists don't do that.
We are out of time, so unfortunately we won't get to ask any more follow-up questions. Mehdi Hasan, thanks for joining, posting through it. Where can people check out Zeteo and everything that your outlet is up to? I really just have nothing but positive things to say about what your team is doing there. It's a breath of fresh air in alternative media.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words. We've worked very hard to get it off the ground over the last year and a bit. I can't believe it's been over a year. Please do check us out, zeteo.com, zeteo.com. Become a paid subscriber, support independent journalism. We're also on YouTube, where we just crossed 1 million subscribers. So we're having an impact. We're growing our audience. We're trying to change the media landscape in this country and beyond. And I'm glad to say it's working, slowly but surely, but it's working.
Thanks so much for coming. We appreciate it.
Thanks both.
I could not do what he does, and there's not like a bone in my body that really wants to do what he does, to be honest. But I'm glad somebody is. Mike, have you ever debated people on the far right?
I mean, in private like texts that would go on for a very long time. I actually remember there's a guy, this is for the real heads out there, and I know there's at least a few people in our listener base that will know who this person is, but there's a character named Millennial Matt. He was one of the Charlottesville guys, and I had a conversation with him about fascism and Hitler and whatever else. And I got in trouble for it in Newsweek because it got so heated, and they're like, you cannot talk to your interview subjects like that. I mean, it's like, well, it's also not your business how I do my job, necessarily. Like, it doesn't affect you unless I'm publishing the interview. It just, I lost my temper a couple of times because he was so atrocious. But that's why I learned that actually, Mehdi's right. You should not actually debate fascists, at least publicly. I've had other conversations where I just get lied to. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where it's just sort of like, oh, that's, anything that you find objectionable about their worldview, they should tell you is sort of gaslight you to tell you it's not happening. But infuriating conversations I've had, infuriating conversations in private. And to Mehdi's credit, and I think this is important to note, there are not many people where I would tolerate them doing that and platforming those, participating in the platforming of those people. And he is one of the few that I would, partly because he was able to handle it so well. That's just my take on it. I really thought he did an amazing job.
Yeah. On the platforming note, I feel like something that I want to bring up that we didn't get to in terms of like how Jubilee found these people. I can't say for sure this is how every person ended up on that show. But when I was researching Jubilee, I came across a web page that they have that is basically just full of different casting calls for the videos that they make. So there's one on the website right now that's looking for people to star in something that will be called Gothcore Women versus Barbiecore Women, whatever that is. But the point is that like the people that are in these videos are not getting pulled off the street. If you respond to this casting call and they pick you, it's my understanding that they will buy you a ticket to Los Angeles, house you up. So the people that are going on this show are kind of seeking it out. And I think that makes a difference for a show like this. It's not a conversation with just like 20 random people who, kind of disagree with Mehdi, but the people in this room, all of them have, or I'm sure most of them at least, have some kind of either existing plug into influencer land or have aspirations of being an influencer, or I don't know, maybe they just want a free trip to Los Angeles. I love visiting LA, but
it's very similar to reality TV calls from back in the day, right?
You'd go to the mall and like talk to people and they'd see if you were like crazy enough to be on Big Brother, right? I remember that.
Right. Or you want to be on Flavor of Love, which is, more my speed. What I was going to say, I'm one of the few Barbie-core males. So I hope they do another show of that and I can get involved in that. I'm both a goth-core and Barbie-core male. But the big question here is like, how many young people who would vote for Trump again are like some of the people that were in this audience. And my guess is that the anti-Semitic white supremacist group is disproportionately represented online and therefore disproportionately represented in videos like this. And that is not to say that there aren't a hideous number of them, but I think people are rewarded for extreme performances in these spaces. And those are the type of people who wanted to be there.
I mean, Mehdi had seemed to have some regrets about aspects of the Jubilee debate that he did, particularly just the people that they brought in were just people that didn't sort of meet his bar for being worthwhile to debate, which is totally fair. But if I disagree with him a little bit, I still think there was maybe some kind of value. And I don't know this is like the strongest argument, but if that sort of class of people or people that think that way, I mean, are overrepresented online as media consumption patterns change, especially, young people are getting all their information online. Maybe there's some kind of secondary value in just wiping the floor with them and embarrassing them. I worry that mode of thinking through the internet, through exposure, I think the real risk is kind of normalizing. And something I appreciated that Mehdi did during that debate was sort of refuse to normalize the people that said they didn't care about the Constitution or they were giving voice to weird racist conspiracy theories and stuff, and really just kind of treated them as the freaks that they are.
I'm going to give the counterpoint to that, which is Hillary Clinton was, people widely believed her to dominate Donald Trump in those debates. And largely what he was known for was being petulant, sniffing a lot. I mean, he was standing in a weird way, et cetera, et cetera. And it didn't do her any good to sort of out-argue this guy. Now, that's just a sample size of one thing. And there's so much extra baggage there, who Hillary Clinton was, who Trump was, what the moment was like, et cetera, et cetera. But I just want to put that sort of thing as a counter, because I think, history is full with people who made better arguments, but lost to a brutal psychopath. And, there's a reason to sort of kind of keep those people away from microphones.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a fair point.
On that note, what I wanted to say is thank you for coming today. Thank you for listening to the podcast, hanging out with us. If you enjoyed what you heard, I want to remind you that the tip jar is in the episode description of the podcast. You just kind of scroll down and take a look at it. Any donations you make goes to producing shows exactly like this and helping us produce shows with guests that you want to hear. What I would also say is we are hoping to expand the show in the coming weeks.
Yeah, a bit about that. I posted something about this on Blue Sky, but this podcast, we currently distribute it through Substack because it is just easy and low cost. And for an operation like this, those are things that make it valuable. But because this show has had such an overwhelming positive response since it relaunched, earlier this year, and Mike came in as co-host and everything, we are now looking to move to Patreon and start broadcasting twice a week. How that would look is that there is a episode on the main feed that is free, and then there's kind of a looser episode that is for premium members. So keep an eye out for that. Moving a podcast has a lot of moving parts. It's complicated. We're still hammering out the exact details. I'm also trying to see if there is an easy way for us to offer something to people who have contributed to the tip jar so far and who will contribute to the tip jar until we make that transition, to see if I can give people like a few free months or something, offer them that to show our appreciation. But keep your eyes out for that. And also, if there's any technical hiccups, in the coming weeks as I'm trying to switch things over. Please forgive me in advance.
Yeah, and one thing I would like to highlight also about the Patreon thing, it is a solution to the advertisement question, because if, once we get the Patreon going, you will be able to get the podcast ad free, and that does not necessarily guaranteed when we have if you listen to it just on Spotify or whatever. So you get an ad free version that is funded by that, because we need to sell this so proverbially one way or another.
So more on that later, but we'll update you guys as we know more and as that kind of comes together. I think that's all we've got for this week, though. So, like Mike said, thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed our conversation with Mehdi, and we'll see you next week.
All right, talk to you next week.
Before I make a terrible mistake and make you rethink everything that you thought